We now move from the clergy covenant to item 29, the 2024 budget. And again, I'm going to outline what will happen, I hope. In a moment, I'm going to ask Edward Creasy, as chair of the DBF, assisted by his team, to give a short presentation on the budget. I'll then invite questions and comments from members of the Synod. So this is your opportunity to quiz that team. And then after the period of questions, I'll ask Edward to move each item on the order paper and we'll vote on them in turn. So, Edward, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, very much. And can I start by apologising to Synod that I look a little bit like someone from the mafia this morning. I'm afraid I picked up the wrong set of reading glasses, so you'll just have to excuse the fact that my eyes will go black for a moment or two. But notwithstanding that, just a few words to introduce this subject. I think it's very important, we all know this, that we are looking at a very, very difficult economic backdrop. And that's particularly true for any organisation that currently relies on the generosity of others to thrive. And the DBF as a whole are very, very cognizant of this. As we all know, we're confronted by persistent inflation and a slow recovery from the turbulence of the pandemic. And that does not help us. Now, one of the most important points to make is that in the environment we find ourselves in, other dioceses have taken the decision to reduce clergy numbers in order to balance the budget. And we don't believe that this is the approach that this diocese should be taking. Our approach is different and it's not without risk, but it has been unanimously approved by the DBF. Our approach is based on the fact that we don't want to cut clergy numbers because we believe strongly that our clergy will deliver the objectives of the Growing in God strategy through increasing congregates' generosity and thereby our financial resources. This budget, therefore, is part of a longer-term strategy to create a flourishing church in Suffolk. Now, the financial situation has not improved over the last 12 months, although our deficit is less than originally forecast. And that's purely because of the fact that it's taking longer than expected to fill vacancies in the year. So to be comfortable when agreeing this budget and the proposed deficit it forecasts, we should all understand the fact that our finances are currently not strong, and we should all be prepared to talk about that openly. We should also be committed to the Growing in God strategy and the longer-term sustainability that it envisages. And we should also be prepared to work together across the Synod to achieve this sustainability, both clergy and laity alike, using the huge range of skills that we have across the diocese. The most important part, of course, is to increase parish share, not only from our amazing congregants, but from others in our parishes who may be occasional churchgoers, but who nonetheless believe in our faith and values and have an affinity with the buildings and the fabric of our parishes. And we must actively seek and be grateful for their support as well. We are also looking at other ways of fundraising, and these include legacies, friends, and a new benefactor programme. And I believe that if we are all able to commit to recognise, own, and resolve to solve our short-term financial issues through focus on our Growing in God strategy, then the Diocese of Future does indeed have a bright future. Diocese of Suffolk does indeed have a bright future. So concluding, I'd like to thank everyone on the call and throughout the diocese for their commitment and support over the last 12 months. Without that, the future would quite frankly be considerably bleaker. With it, we have the opportunity to create a vibrant and confident diocese secure in the direction that we've taken. And those are my comments, Tony. I'll now hand over to Steve and Phil to take it from there.
Thank you very much, Edward. Can we have the next slide up, please? I'm going to say two things. First of all, a thank you to, and Edward's already said that, to all of the benefices and parishes for the efforts on parish share and other ways of contributing to the diocesan good. I think it's been an outstanding effort, and as you'll see, that has been very, very good considering how difficult times have been very, very recently. Also, I want to take the opportunity to congratulate Gary on his appointment as Diocesan Secretary. Extremely well deserved, and well done, Gary. You're going to make an excellent job of it. Can we go on to the next slide, please? A little bit of history. This shows the unrestricted losses, or indeed small profits, that the diocese has made over the really the last decade, and then a forward projection over the next 4 or 5 years. So going back to 2011 and the 4 or 5 years after, as you can see, the diocese was making a loss each year, somewhere between £500,000 and £1.2 million, so considerably underwater. Then in 2015, 2016, we had a change at the top of the diocese, new bishops, change of diocesan secretary, and the appointment of a finance director, Gary Peverley. And things started to get better. So 2016, 2017, as you can see, the losses were reduced to about £200,000 a year. And that good news story continued through 2018 and 19, where we broke even and indeed made small surpluses during those years. I think everyone knows what happened in the middle of 2020, in fact, the earlier part of 2020, when COVID struck. And everything really shut down. We did even well that year still to essentially hold the position in terms of how the diocese was performing. But 2021, 22, and into 23, the continuation of the recovery from COVID, as Edward has already alluded to, the impact of the war in Ukraine, and as we've seen very recently, other conflicts which inevitably will have an impact on the ability to raise funds. And there, whether you can argue that caused inflation or the inflation was coming anyway, doesn't really matter. Either way, the inflationary trend again has impacted our cost base considerably, and has meant that we have been producing losses in the region of £200,000 to £300,000 over the past 3 years. And that, again, as has been alluded to, is better than was expected. So we've done actually better than we had originally forecast. But as you can see, for the 2024 year, which is the year in question, we are anticipating a much larger deficit, somewhere in the region of £600,000 to £650,000. And this is because, as again Edward has alluded to, we are continuing to maintain clergy numbers and continue the programs of growing in God, and really not taking the same pathway and direction as a number of other dioceses who have chosen to cut clergy numbers and indeed cut buildings as well. But in order to do that, there are risks associated with that, and the assumption is that we can, in the years 25, 26, 27, continue to reduce the losses and start to approach a break-even position. The big underlying risk here, though, is cash flow. Here you're looking at profit numbers, and any business can make a profit or a loss, but we need to ensure that cash is coming in to ensure that we continue to oil the mechanism of the diocese. Next slide, please. Just to give a perspective on this slide, a little bit complex. The red line, the red wavy line, you can see going across the page, that is parish share going back to 2010 and projected out to 2026. And the left-hand side, the bar chart, is the number of planned givers across the diocese. The heavy blue is the current position to date, and then just into the future. and the lighter blue are the projections. As you can see with parish share, up until now, even with inflation, and I appreciate inflation was much lower than we've seen over the past 18 to 24 months, but even so, inflation was running at 1%, 2%, 3% a year, even in the years 2010 to 2021, 2022. So to only have held the parish share means that in real terms, the parish share number was dropping, even though our costs have been increasing throughout this period. This budget assumes that we will see an increase in parish share, not at the level of inflation, but at least starting to address some of the shortfall we've seen in parish share over the past decade. You can see the backdrop is, though, that the number of planned givers is continuing to fall. We're hoping stabilise and go up near the end of the budget period, but nevertheless, over the past decade, it has fallen. And inevitably, as it says at the bottom of the slide, this will impact on both cash flow and reserves going forward. Next slide, please. In terms of clergy numbers, again, I think the slide illustrates that our intention is very much to maintain the status quo on clergy numbers, and indeed, compared to a year or two ago, even increase the numbers of clergy we have across the diocese. So we're not cutting back at all. So there are risks associated with that. I'd now like to hand over to Philip Codling. Philip is just joined the diocese in the last few months as our interim finance director and has made a big impact in helping to shore up the finances and help Gary, given Gary's wider responsibilities. So I'd like to pass on to Philip.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm moving on to the next slide, and it falls to me to basically summarize that rather large budget file that you all had distributed. This slide looks at where we are this year, because obviously the budget for 24 is taken from the basis of the forecast for 2023. The deficit we're expecting at the end of August was 0.3, and we think we'll maintain that deficit through to the full year. That's considerably better than the full year budget, but as we've already said, that's entirely due to many ups and downs, but the bulk of it is down to not having the clergy that we originally budgeted. Parish share at August was 3.7 against a full year forecast of 6.1. There again, we budgeted 6.5, but we've scaled back on our forecast to be a little bit more realistic. To update you on the numbers, the collections to September were 4.2 million, which is pretty good, but that still leaves 1.9 to be gathered in the last quarter, which could be a challenge. We're looking at the clergy going down. We have 105 currently, 113 at August, and that's also at September. At some point I forecasted, when we did this back in June, the full year clergy would be 122. Looking at the vacancies as they are at the moment and looking at the appointments, and obviously this changes, and Bishop Martin knows this better than I, but currently we have 17 incumbents places available that we're recruiting for, and at the end of the year that looks like it will be reduced to 16, so we'll only be one more up on the year than we are at this point, given changes that happen all the time. So that doesn't actually impact on the money, because when we forecast it, we took it on a rolling rate and not on a head count. So that's pretty much up to date on that slide. If we move to the next slide, please. Now the budget is forward looking. It has to make assumptions. So these are the key assumptions that we've made in the as the basis for the budget. Parish share, we're only putting up parish share 3%. We're also reflecting a more realistic collection rate than has been done in the past, and we're expecting it over the life of the budget through to 2027 to increase 1% a year. We think that is realistic. Clergy, we continue to budget at the clergy rates that we would like to have, as has been mentioned many times throughout this morning's meetings. The pay rise for staff and clergy is put at 6.6%. Looking at the Office of National Statistics, the annual pay rises between May and July were quoted, and this is for regular pay excluding bonuses, at 7.8%. So 6.6 is fair and not overly generous. The actual cost of goods we're put in at 5%. That may look a little low. Currently, the core inflation in July was 6.9, core being inflation excluding energy, food, alcohol, and tobacco, because we don't actually consume any of those in the diocese. In August, that was down to 6.2. So we are hoping that it will continue to fall to around the 5%. As Steve has said, cash flow is critical. We can't continue as we are. We will at some point have to liquidate some investments to meet our cash flow objectives. So on the basis of these assumptions, we are coming out with a deficit of 0.64. Next slide, please. So what we've been discussing thus far is the unrestricted activities of the diocese. This is basically the core activities. We also have Churchgates, which is a limited company which has some rental properties. That's due to make a surplus this year, which will be donated to the DBF as a gift. We have the schools activities. They are self-funding and will show a surplus of 21 this coming year. And other restricted funds, which is the pastoral account and the board trusts, will be a deficit of 63. On that basis, the overall deficit for all the activities of the DBF will be 616. Next slide. This is cutting all the data that's in your pack for the budget in a manner to meet the normal motions of the Synod to approve the income, etc., which I won't anticipate Edward's announcement of, but the figures are there for you to see, and they are exactly the same as in the budget file. So are there any questions?
And now we're going to questions. Sally Wainwright has got a, can I invite people, if you wish to raise a question, to raise your electronic hand. Sally Wainwright is the first person to have done so. Sally, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry, Sally Wainman. I mean, it doesn't matter too much.
Sorry, Wainman.
Yes, yeah, cool, distillery. Do the DBF liaise with the church commissioners for any help whatsoever? Because the main problem is one of perception that the church has lots of money, and when they see the church commissioners giving out millions, they just cannot understand why we need to fundraise. But I particularly want to know, the church commissioners did give a bit of help with energy grants. Where are they in this total financial picture? Where do the church commissioners come in?
I'll let whoever, Steve or Phil or Edward, jump in and answer each question as best appropriate.
Well, Gary, let me jump in with and Gary may correct the numbers for me. When the pandemic first started, my memory is we got in the region of 600,000 from Central Church. I think the following year, so this would be 21, I think we got about 200,000. I don't believe we've had anything directly from Central Church in this respect over the last year, and I'm not aware there's any assumptions in the budget for any funding from Central Church. Now, that's not to say there aren't additional monies, and perhaps, Gary, you're probably better placed because you've probably got the overview.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely right. We have had support in the past, but that support is no longer available. You're right, Sally. We had, some support last year for energy grants and those sort of things. At the moment, those sort of things are not being planned for 23-24. However, it's National Church is investing significantly in a number of different programs, and I realise people are the issue is around how we're supporting at a parish level now, but they're in terms of growing younger, in terms of being more diverse, in terms of reaching out to our communities, there are lots of opportunities to invest, and we've talked about some of those things in the budget around net zero carbon, around the projects around growing younger, and around the support for our clergy on the leadership program. So there are means and ways, and we will continue to work with National Church about how we support more widely. But there's certainly significant investment across the diocese by National Church, but it might not be quite in the things that we would like. But there are definitely lots and lots of opportunities to obtain grants and to support us at a local level, and we're looking at those all the time.
Thank you, Gary. Richard Finch is the next person with his hand up.
Okay, my question is about strategy for maintaining the number of stipendiary clergy in the diocese. When a stipendiary post becomes vacant and the review is made of the benefice, so it might be a multi-parish benefice, questions, of course, quite rightly asked about finance and whether they can afford the parish share. And therefore, what is the forward-looking strategy if you're not going to reduce stipendiary clergy? Does that mean the diocese will have to accept that there will be benefices that will say, we can't afford the parish share, where it may be 0.9 of it or something like that? How does the diocese respond in that situation going ahead?
Edward.
I think that's probably one for Gary, actually, more than
Right,
me.
I beg your pardon.
I'll let Gary have a go first.
Okay, that's fine. So really good question, and I think it does depend on individual circumstances, Richard, around that conversation. The reality is that population moves, and there are different ways to provide that stipendiary support. And so, of course, don't forget we have a significant number of self-supporting ministers as well. So the provision of ministry is in many, many different ways at a local level. But in terms of stipendiary support, we will be maintaining our numbers because we're looking at chaplaincy posts, for example. We're looking at new housing estates and how we support those. But we always have a conversation at a local level, and we particularly don't want to see withdrawal of ministry in any areas of Suffolk. But there will have to be some redesign and some acknowledgement where affordability is an issue, to look at how that might be done differently at a local level, but to offer the same level of support. So it's an individual conversation, a local conversation, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we will withdraw clergy provision because of low payment of parish share. It means we have to look at the round and consider those changes within the whole, but we're not reducing our numbers overall at all.
Right. I've got an indication that either Bishop Mike or Bishop Martin might wish to chip in. I'd invite either of those to exercise their prerogative and come in.
Can I come in after David? Because there are 3 or 4 things I'd quite like.
Okay, that will be fine. Thank you.
Can I come in now? Can I come in now? Just to answer.
By all means.
So just on this, really good question, Richard. I mean, there are a number of things here that need to be emphasised, I think. First of all, myself and Bishop Martin are very firm about wanting to keep stipendiary numbers, and not least because all of the stats show that there is a correlation between growth and stipendiary numbers in the church. So it makes very good sense to maintain as far as possible that we can. One of the difficulties with a situation where we ask benefices whether they can afford a stipendiary priest is it doesn't actually agree with the wider model of the understanding of the diocese, which is that wealthier parishes contribute to the poorer parishes in order that everybody can have a stipendiary priest. So there's some degree of giving and receiving there that we need to emphasize. The other thing to say is, while it is challenging to maintain these numbers, and many dioceses have not been able to, there are certain schemes available within the Church of England which we are plugging into as early adopters to kind of bolster this strategy. So, for instance, there's a 5-year tapering scheme for first incumbents coming out of curacies, where they begin by paying for the whole of that stipend, and gradually the central Church Commissioner's contribution is reduced as hopefully locally the parish share goes up. But we certainly need more of those, and we're certainly in conversation with the church nationally to see how it is that we can ensure we don't get into a downward cycle of reducing stipendiary clergy and therefore of shrinking as churches, and therefore having to reduce even more the stipends we have.
Thank you. David Lamming then.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes, could I just, as it were, respond to Sally Wayman's question? Can I refer Synod members to the draft minutes of the Bishops' Council meeting on the 14th of September, page 4, where under item 2376, the end of that, you will see that a group has been set up, of which I am a member, along with Tony Allwood, Andrew Gray and Tiffany Robinson, to look at crafting a motion to bring to this synod next March, with a view to forwarding it on to General Synod as a diocesan synod motion, to look at this whole question of how the Church Commissioner's funding can be better deployed to support ministry in parishes. It's not an easy topic. A lot has been said, of course, about the Church Commissioners sitting on funds now currently worth, I think, 10.5 billion, but they are tied up in various ways by statutory requirements. So I don't think, Sally, that we are in a position of being able to put forward anything, even if it got debated at General Synod next year, that is going to affect the 2024 budget. But be assured that this diocese is hoping to be in the forefront, probably along with others, in requiring General Synod to look at how the finances of the church commissioners might be better used to support parish clergy, and thereby, of course, reduce the burden on the parish share. Thank you.
Good, David. I see no other hands up on questions. So, Bishop Martin, would you like to just offer a few comments before we move to the votes?
Thank you. And I waited particularly for David because I was pretty sure he was going to say one of the things I was going to say, which he just has. Can I just make 2 or 3 points? One is that, and I don't have chapter and verse on this, but on the issue of reducing clergy numbers and watching our other dioceses reducing clergy numbers, the thing that strikes me, as far as I can tell, they're still in the same financial quandary that they were in before they reduced clergy numbers. So we need to recognise that does not solve anything. If anything, it exacerbates. And that's building on Mike's point there too. In relation to the church commissioners, I'm quite clear that there is at least, as David has indicated, a huge communication exercise we have to do. But also, I think there are areas where we might find there is some opportunity with appropriate encouragement for the commissioners to be looking at distributing their funds a little differently. One of the areas that they have undertaken to do is to review the Low Income Community Fund, which we do not qualify for, but the Diocese of Norwich does. Now, I can't figure that one out, but that's a fund that is set up to support low-income communities where they can't afford, and they're never likely to be able to afford to have the stipendiary priest that you would expect them to have. So I'm hoping that review will produce some shift at least, and that we will possibly see through the work of the little group that we've set up some other options that we might be encouraging General Synod to be considering in relation to the church commissioners. And if I can just go to one last point, which picks up on something Mike said about the principle of giving and receiving. When I came here 8-9 years ago, whenever it was, there were certainly parishes that generously gave to support those that were unable to support their own costs. And that, of course, is a situation that has been challenged by the circumstances that Steve has talked about, which is, the pandemic and then the cost of living crisis and so forth, which has really hit everybody. And I think what I would hope we can do is, in some way or other, get back to a model where we can see ourselves as being all in this together, and those who are able to support others will do so. Now, we did see that in 2020 when a number of parishes that had particular financial resources were contributing above and significantly above what they had been requested, and that certainly helped. But getting back into that sort of spirit of supporting one another, I think, is really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Martin. And thank you to everyone who's asked those questions. That's actually drawn out some very interesting points. So thank you to all of those. I'm now